I've said it time and time again on this channel, the Beatles are simply the greatest band of all time, so it would be easy to assume that the band members are incredibly talented geniuses, and for the most part, you wouldn't be wrong. That is the reason why when they began to release their solo stuff back in 1968, everyone was super hyped. Some people were concerned about the band's future, they thought they were breaking up, and they were right. Most people were excited, they wanted to see what the band members of the greatest band ever were capable of doing outside of the Beatles. However, when these albums were actually released and people got to hear the records, it was clear that the band members had a different idea in mind because they created some of the most disturbing, unpolished, creepy, and unfinished records ever made. And that is the main reason why I decided to make this video. I want to explore this album, so I want to give you my opinion on the records, and I want to give a little context so a lot of you can make sense out of these albums and understand why they were released in the first place. I want to make sure you guys understand that this is only my personal opinion, so if you have your own, and I'm pretty sure you do, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments and I'll make sure to check it out and give you my opinion on your opinion. With that being said, I don't want to make the intro too long, so let's go with the first album. Now, a lot of people know that George Harrison had a fascination for Indian classical music. He had the song Love You Too in the album Revolver, he has Within You Without You in Blue Way J in 1967. However, for a Beatles fan that doesn't really know a lot about the history of the band and the history of George Harrison as a solo artist, that's as far as it goes when it comes to George Harrison and Hindu culture. But the actual story is way more interesting because after the band's second movie, Help, Harrison was offered the opportunity to create the score for a psychedelic film called Wonderwall, released in 1968. This album is called Wonderful Music, and it serves as the actual first album George Harrison ever released, and even though it's hardly an enjoyable musical experience, it's actually quite insufferable. It is very interesting, especially as a Beatles fan, because Harrison wanted to educate people. He wanted to show the genre how many different instruments and styles there were missing out on. He wanted to show that he could make music that was enjoyable and interesting and listenable with this new style. This album was incredibly influential and incredibly helpful for the Indian classical music scene that was beginning to be known thanks to George Harrison's effort to put the music out there. Critics obviously destroyed the album, and I myself don't enjoy this record one bit. I think there's a lot of unfinished ideas. I think there's a lot of annoying high-pitched sounds that totally ruined the atmosphere the album sometime manages to build. His next album, Electronic Sounds, had a similar problem. Interesting ideas, interesting concepts. This time around he wanted to try and play with a lot of different sounds produced by the Moog synthesizer. However, it feels like the idea ended up being bigger than the artist because it's clear that he doesn't really know how to use all these different types of sound. Very similar to what happened with McCartney. On McCartney 2, I know it's a different approach to electronic sounds, but it's pretty much the same issue. They don't know how to play this instrument. Even though in Abbey Road this same instrument is used more effectively, I don't really think that Harrison was fully capable of bringing out the most potential out of this synthesizer, and it's pretty evident because it was thanks to synthesizers like this that the 80s ended up happening, you know. The result is basically a bunch of sounds that sometimes manage to create an interesting musical passage here and there. Sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's quite atmospheric, but immediately after is interrupted by high-pitched music, weird metalish sounds that don't really make sense inside the song, and this avant-garde aura to the entire thing that just ruined the entire album. Because even though I don't have a problem with avant-garde music, and I think there's a lot of albums out there that truly represent the potential of the genre, I feel like the Beatles were being kind of pretentious when they started to explore with this type of music, because it feels like they thought that just because they were the Beatles they could go to any genre and succeed, and these two albums are perfect examples that is not the case. For the most part, these are unlistenable, and I wouldn't recommend these albums to any George Harrison fan. I guess if you want to explore his history a little bit more, then yeah, go ahead and give it a try, but that's pretty much the only reason why you should even touch this album. Small disclaimer here, I know you're supposed to put this at the very beginning of the video, but listen, I won't be talking about Ringo Starr's sentimental journey in this video, mainly because I don't really see the point. It's just a bunch of covers made by a guy who wasn't really known for his vocal performance, so I don't really know what Ringo's idea was. But if you guys want to know my opinion on that album, I don't think it's good. I know there's people who find this charm in the instrumentation transition and how he decided to go back to his roots for his first solo album after the Beatles. However, I don't think it was a good idea. It sounds very, very bad. His performance is not good at all. So even though I would listen to this record over a lot of the other albums I'm talking about in this video, the main reason why I'm not including it here is because it's just not interesting. At least the other records have an interesting story, have an interesting concept, and have a unique approach when it comes to the creation of the album. This is just a bunch of covers. So yeah, that's my opinion on the record. I'm just gonna get it out of the way and continue to John Lennon. What to say about this stage in John's career? I mean, even though Harrison's electronic phase wasn't enjoyable at all, it was quite insufferable for the most part, especially considering that All Things Must Pass was right around the corner, ready to blow our minds. At least you can call that music. But what Yoko and Lennon decided to do on a night of 1968 while Cynthia was away could have a name on its own, because this is basically the recordings of the first affair John Lennon had with Yoko Ono, resulting in Yoko screaming to the microphone in ways that are so annoying and just unlistenable, while John's playing different tapes that really have no order or correlation to each other whatsoever. I mean, I understand the concept of avant-garde music, I know what the genre stands for, however, this cannot be called that. It's just two people playing in a home studio. There's a lot of reasons why this trilogy is very well known, the main one being the album cover for the first part of the trilogy, two virgins being Yoko Ono and John Lennon butt naked, both front and back. This album can be so disturbing sometimes. I mean, there's a part in here where it's basically John and Yoko having sex, then you have another segment that's them calling each other's name in ways that go from tender to sexual to anger. You know, it's a lot of moments that I don't really understand what the plan was, which is exactly why I despise this record so much. This is not music. This is everything but music. I respect an effort like Electronic Sounds and Wonderwall music because at least George Harrison was trying to create music. In a different way, yes. In a way that didn't work that well, yes. In a way that wasn't all that enjoyable, yes. But at least he was trying to create something new. What John Lennon was trying to do in this album has no explanation. There's a lot of people that defend this album saying that, you know, at least it's an interesting idea, it's very unique, and to an extent I do agree. It is very unique, you know, but it would also be unique if I were to record myself making dinner while trying to perform a rap version of Bohemian Rhapsody, but it would still be shit. You know, just because an idea is unique, it doesn't really mean that it's good or that it should be praised. It's really easy to come up with someone that hasn't been invented yet. The problem is making it enjoyable for a lot of people. There's this theory of mine that John Lennon was just trying to mock people with this albums, because I don't really believe that the man that was actively writing the songs from the White Album, one of the greatest albums ever made, was also doing this type of shit. You know, in records like Abbey Road and Plastic Ono Band that was right around the corner too, this man created those records. You're telling me it's the same person trying to make an interesting album, creating Plastic Ono Band, and then this shit? I don't believe it. It's really hard for me to believe such a thing. So for me, I think he was kind of mocking people or trying to test a theory. How far can I go? How much bullshit can I make before people stop listening to my music or stop calling me a genius? And honestly, even though it's probably not the case, even though this was probably just another phase of John trying to make something new and create a different type of music, I personally don't understand how such a genius could make such a bad piece of music, or a bad piece of unfinished music as he liked to call it, and listen back on it, you know, listen to the finished product and say, yeah, this is good to be released, this is to the best of my abilities. I've gotten into hour-long debates about whether or not this should be called music, and my answer is always no, mainly because I just refuse to believe or refuse to call Yoko Ono screaming over John's randomly played tapes music. I just refuse to believe that. However, I know I'm getting quite intense here. I wanted to end the video on a positive note, which is why to end the video, we'll be talking about McCartney's first solo release, McCartney 1. Here's the thing. The most puzzling thing about this entire video is the fact that we're talking about albums that were released by the members of the greatest band of all time. Their albums always had incredible songwriting, masterful production, and a uniform excellence that made you feel like the album was connected through something more than just the music. But sometimes the amateurish, homemade nature of these albums can prove to work in the record's favor, and a perfect example of that will be McCartney 1. With this album, McCartney tries to find his place in a world where the Beatles are no more. When we're listening to this record, we're listening to someone trying to figure out his own sound and learning how to use it and eventually perfect it. The fact that this is a home recorded album fully produced and performed by Paul McCartney also adds to the personal feels of the record, and I guess you could say the same thing about the Unfinished Trilogy and the Electronic Sounds by George Harrison, but the difference would be the fact that this record actually has enjoyable songs like Junk, Man We Was Lonely, Every Night, and Maybe I'm Amazed, often ranked among the greatest songs by Paul McCartney. Even though there's a lot of unfinished songs on this album, you know, every instrumental piece was supposed to be a fully fledged song as far as I know, they're surprisingly well produced, and overall the album is extremely enjoyable. It lacks the substance to be the fully fledged masterpiece it was supposed to be, especially when you compare it to albums like Ram, Band on the Run, or maybe Venus and Mars, but it's still a really enjoyable record, and it's a really interesting one because you can clearly see how this album evolved into Ram and evolved into Band on the Run. You clearly see this record as the genesis of Paul McCartney's solo discography, and for that reason I think it's a really good way to end this video. It's a positive way to look at the band's solo discography, knowing that at least one of the members from the Beatles dedicated their first album to understand what they wanted to do with their music, but at the same time delivering an album that the people will enjoy, you know, because even though this album faced a lot of controversy, especially because it was released in the midst of a lawsuit that Paul McCartney filed against the Beatles, it's still an amazing record, and in my opinion, out of the 4 Beatles and their first albums, this is definitely the best one. However, this is only my personal opinion, so if you guys have your own, and I'm pretty sure you do, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments, and I'll make sure to check it out and give you my opinion on your opinion. I truly hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, an artist, or an album, go ahead and leave it down below as well, and I'll make sure to check it out and fulfill your request as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.